All right. I am calling to order the regular board meeting of the North County Transit District for May 21st of 2020. And I will ask Anthony Flores, the clerk of the board, to call roll.
Yes, sir. Jack Feller. He's here. Tony Krantz.
Here.
John Franklin. Paul McNamara.
Here.
Jim Desmond.
Here.
Terry Gasserlin.
Here.
Jewel Edson.
Here.
Yes, ma'am. Sharon Jenkins.
Here.
Priya Patel.
Here.
All right, very good. We will rise and say the pledge of allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag
Of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Now, Anthony will provide a safety briefing and review evacuation procedures.
Yes, sir. In the event of emergency, I will dial 911. In the event of an evacuation, please exit the building using the stairs. Do not use the elevator. Once cleared of the building, please do not re-enter unless told to do so by emergency personnel. We have fire extinguishers and first aid kits on each floor of the building. We also have a portable defibrillator located on the first building and staff on hand trained on CPR procedures. That concludes my safety brief, sir.
Thank you. Anthony, are there any changes to the agenda?
Yes, sir. There is one change to the agenda. Agenda item number 11 was pulled by staff and will be deferred to a future board meeting yet to be determined.
Okay, thank you. Are there any telephonic comments for oral communications today?
No, sir.
Okay, so before we get into specific items on the agenda for the meeting, I would like to outline the protocols to make this meeting as efficient as possible. First, please hold your comments and or questions until after the agenda item has been presented. And second, when the time comes for board member comments or questions, I will call on each individual board member to see if they have anything for the specific agenda item. Finally, if there are any follow-up comments or questions, please state who is making the request and I will call upon you to make your comment. And today we're going to combine the minutes and the consent item into one vote. First, though, I would ask, is there anyone that has any changes that they wish for the minutes? And if not, I'd take a motion to combine it with a consent vote.
Jewel Edson, so moved.
Terry,
Second.
I'll second.
Okay. Very good. There are 14 consent items for today. And have any been pulled by the public?
No, sir.
Any board members have any consent item questions? If not, I'll entertain a motion to approve consent items 1 through 10 and 12 through 15.
Jewel Edson, so moved.
Second by Jenkins.
So motion by Edson and a second by Jenkins, and now we will vote. And this is a vote for both the minutes as well as the consent calendar, less item number 11.
Okay. On the motion of board member Joel Edson, seconded by board member Sharon Jenkins, to approve the regular board meeting, to approve the minutes of the regular board meeting held on April 16th, 2020, and to approve consent items 1 through 10 and 12 through 15. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Oh, sorry. Abstain? Motion passes with all board members present voting yes.
Okay, great, thanks. Moving on to other business item, number 16, and this one of going to be presented by Sean Lufborough, Chief of Safety.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and those dialing in remotely. We're going to talk about the Public Transit Agency Safety Plan.
There's been some recent updates in some of the rules regarding safety plans from not only the Federal Transit Administration, but the Federal Railroad Administration. I'll go through that, detail some accountability and responsibilities. Maybe. Okay, thank you. We'll talk a little bit about the safety division overview. Again, the regulatory requirements. We'll go through our safety plans, and then I'll have a recommendation at the end. Next slide, please. Thank you. So safety is important, and it's in our mission statement to deliver safe, convenient, reliable, user-friendly public transportation services. And everybody has accountability at all levels. That includes our frontline employees for reporting. The board itself has a responsibility to make sure that there's enough funding allocated for safety and safety programs, and making sure that there's strategic decision-making regarding service levels, investment in our capital program, and make sure that, again, safety has the resources it needs to do its job. The safety division itself, I report to Mr. Tucker, the executive director, and my charter is to identify hazards, prevent and respond to accidents and incidents, look at the safety data, conduct an internal audit program, and make sure that we are compliant with all federal and state regulations. I have 4 employees that work for me. They're safety specialists focused. I have 1 in rail, 1 for bus, 1 for facilities and construction, and then a audit and compliance officer. So those 4 myself make up the composition of the safety division. So as far as the updates and the regulatory requirements, I'll walk you through the FTA first, and then we'll go through the FRA. As far as the FTA, this really started under President Obama in 2012 with the Moving Ahead for Progress in the 21st Century Act, otherwise known as MAP 21. They did promote safety through safety management system principles, as well as the state of good repair and safety performance. Based on that, the FTA released 3 different rules regarding safety, training, and compliance to make sure that transit agencies would be poised for success in the future and base their safety program based on those safety management system principles. The first one was 49 CFR 672, the Public Transportation Safety Certification Training Program. The final rule for that was released in 2018. It sets minimum training requirements for employees who are directly responsible for safety oversight. For NCTD, that is my entire division, as well as select members of the operations divisions that will be required to do that. 49 CFR 673 is the Ptest. That's the reason that we're here today. That is the Public Transportation Agency Safety Plan. It says that the safety plan for the FTA-controlled revenue vehicles and assets must be developed based on the SMS approach, and it must be approved by the board of directors. So that is in the rule, and that is the reason that we are here today. 674 is the State Safety Oversight Agency. That basically says the FTA will have an arm that executes as a state safety oversight for California. It's the CPUC, or the California Public Utilities Commission. And that's specifically for fixed guideway, not covered by the FRA in general. For NCTD territory, that would mean the Sprinter. And that State Safety Oversight Agency, or the CPUC, must verify that our Ptest is approved by the board of directors. They also conduct a review, which we've almost completed with them as well. So as far as our current safety plan, we did have 1 plan for all 5 of our modes. That was the Integrated Safety Management System Plan, or ISMSP. The last revision was in January 2020. And that was compliant for both the FRA and the FTA. But unfortunately, the new rules that I already highlighted with the FTA, in combination with an FRA new rule, 49 CFR 270, had different requirements for safety plans. So 673, as I alluded to earlier, was the FTA requirement for the safety plan. The FRA rule is the second one down, that 49 CFR 270, and that requires the development of a system safety program. Very similar to the rule, but there are some slight differences, and both the FRA and the FTA recommend 2 separate plans for those. They did not recommend combining those 2 together, which is also one of the reasons why we're here. We did have a meeting with the regulators, and the way ahead is the FRA rule. It is not waived for the Sprinter. Therefore, we intend to put the Sprinter in the FRA required system safety program, and will continue to have this Ptest for our Breeze, Lift, and Flex services. So as a review for the Ptest for 49 CFR 673, that rule was released in July, and we have to have it completed by July 2020. Although the FTA did release a notice of eased enforcement, which is through the end of the year due to COVID-19, but we were ready to go, so we intended to go ahead and execute the plan based on the original timeline. It does require approval from the State Safety Oversight Agency, and the CPUC does have a copy of our plan, and they're conducting their review at this time. It also requires approval from this board of directors, which is why we're here. And the major updates include full SMS implementation and additional safety metrics that was required to be tracked based on the National Transportation Safety Plan. Those includes items such as incidents, accidents, miles between preventative failures, and we will track those and report accordingly. So the Ptest will cover Sprinter and bus modes for now until we have that 49 CFR 270 or the FRA plan in place, and then that plan will cover both Sprinter and Coaster. Again, the Ptest was submitted to the State Safety Oversight Agency for review. We received a response, and we've been able to address those comments. The FRA rule is 49 CFR 270. That rule just came out in March 2020. That's why it kind of threw a wrench in our plan, because the rule was stayed for approximately 4 years, but it was finally released and has a 1-year implementation program, requires the development of a plan based on safety management system principles, and it does require consultation with bargain unit employees, which are those that are represented by unions. Those have to be complete by July. We already have those scheduled with the union employees. We have 2 scheduled in June to make sure that that's their opportunity to provide input for items that they would like to see in the plan, and that is required in the rule. The plan has to be approved by the FRA within 1 year of release, which would be March 2021, and must be submitted for review by as early as May, but as late as January for them to review and provide comment back. We did conduct initial meetings with the bargain employees back in 2016, but we felt it's prudent to do a refresher because the rules have changed and it has been 4 years. And again, the final product, once 270 plan is approved or the system safety program, it will be for both our rail modes, Coaster and Sprinter, and then the Ptest will be updated to reflect the bus modes only. So based on all that, I know it's somewhat confusing, but the staff recommendation is that the NCTD Board of Directors adopt resolution number 2003, approving the 2020 Public Transportation Safety Plan, Ptest, for compliance with 49 CFR Part 673 and 674. Pending any questions or comments, I can answer right now.
Very good, thank you. Anthony, do we have any telephonic comments for this agenda item?
We do not, but Mr. Frank said that technical difficulties trying to connect everyone to the
Okay, thanks. Are there any questions from the board? Board Member Jenkins.
My question is there any benefit to waiting since we're a little early and the timeline's been eased?
I don't think so.
Okay.
And really, it's not, the actual timeline has not changed. They've just said they're going to ease enforcement.
Okay.
So we already had the plan developed. We actually started it last fall because we knew it was going to be due and there would have to be some back and forth as far as approval process. So at this point, the plan's ready to go. We just felt it was prudent to move ahead and do that. There's really no advantage to waiting from my perspective.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Board Member Edson, any questions?
Mr. Feller, did you?
No, sir. Thank you.
I just wanted to add, this is a perfect time to be doing things like this ahead of time because we're going to be going gangbusters trying to figure out a lot of things in the next year. So
Thank you.
I move approval.
Do I have a second?
Second by Edson.
All right.
On the motion of Board Vice Chair Jack Feller, seconded by Board Member Joel Edson, to approve agenda item number 16. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Those that abstain? Motion passes with all board members present voting yes.
Thank you
Okay.
very much.
Thank you. Moving on to informational items 17 and 18. Of the two, Matt Tucker, Executive Director, and Yoon Park Lynch, Chief Financial Officer, will review item 17. Please keep in mind that this is an informational item with board action scheduled for June. Staff has provided a significant amount of supporting documentation and is prepared to have a robust discussion.
So thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to start this presentation. It's going to be kind of in two sections. I'm going to walk through kind of the key budget goals and priorities. Yoon's going to walk through the actual numbers and be able to explain in detail exactly what those numbers mean and why the numbers say what they say. Okay, so I think the context in terms of the development of the budget goes back to the framework that the board has approved for us to operate. If you recall back in FY20, last fiscal year, we adopted a 5-year program of projects to support the development of our capital and operating budget. We met with the executive committee back in March, and the executive committee reviewed those proposed budget goals and expressed its support for maintaining the budget goals that we established in fiscal year 2020. So we're continuing to operate within that framework, those goals that were adopted as part of a 5-year strategy, continuing to move forward with this fiscal year 21 budget. So the FY21 budget is developed based on the guidance along with the operational and business considerations, including the impacts of COVID-19. So one of the things I wanted to do was to set a framework, because I know we do have lots of new board members. This graph here kind of illustrates the performance of the district over the last few years in terms of improving our position as it relates to cash. I arrived at the district at December 2008. And when I arrived, the district was faced with a 5-year deficit that exceeded $80 million. We worked significantly hard over the course of this 10-year period to transform our business model. We took significant activities, including outsourcing our bus operations and completely overturning our business model. And as you can see, we've been successful in achieving financial stability because we've taken a long-range approach to how we manage our budget process. So as we hit into this COVID-19 period, I do want to let the board know that we are planning for contingencies that may come up beyond what we have identified in our budget. So we already have developed service contingency plans. If you look in the service implementation plan document, we have provided various scenarios of service cuts for the district should they have to be enacted. And we have also worked through, from a personnel point of view, to identify phased reductions in personnel should that have to play out. Again, I would reiterate, based upon the best information that we have and the stress test that we've done, we don't believe that we will have to take any such action, but we do need to be prepared in event things happen beyond what we expect. So with that, we're moving forward again with the context of looking forward to the future. Almost all of the initiatives that we were talking about exceeded 1-year time frame to implement. So we're continuing to advance our zero delay initiatives from purchasing and new equipment. We're hoping to come to the board in the month of June to award, actually we already have gotten approval for the board for the purchase of additional cabs and locomotive procurements. So we're continuing that approach in terms of advancing zero delay initiatives and advancing improvements to our system to support attracting more riders to the system. We won't always be in the period that we're in today. Continue to advance service improvements. We initiated a study more than a year ago. That study is anticipated to wrap up over the course of this year. And we are still moving forward towards implementing in a phased manner improved frequencies. One of the things that we have said is that the first phase is due to start in April of 2021. But we have said if we are still experiencing significant impacts of COVID-19, we would not implement those significant service improvements in 2021. But I would just remind the board that right now, as we sit, we really do operate a system that does not provide the levels of frequencies that one would expect to be able to attract riders. So for us, it's kind of a zero-sum game that we do need to make sure that we're providing a much higher quality of service that will attract new customers to the system. Continuing to advance capital projects. We've all talked ad nauseum about Delmar Bluff stabilization, but as you are aware, we have a significant amount of bridge projects that require replacement, and we need to do continue to advance double track projects to support increased passenger and freight capacity improvements and frequencies. I would tell you we are making significant progress in terms of identifying a framework to advance this. I'm hoping to come forward to the board in the next month or so to talk about that in specific detail. Thing doesn't work. Okay, state of good repair projects, funding for these replacement of these bridges. We just identified a couple of them. If you recall, we identified more than $800 million worth of capital improvement project needs. Positive train control. I'll spend a minute here. As you all are aware, positive train control was a federally mandated safety technology. We received a grant for about $87.3 million to implement positive train control. As we sit today, we anticipate fully closing out that grant by the end of 2021. Then positive train control will become a system that NCTD will have to fund the operations and maintenance out of our budget. So we're beginning the early work of incorporating positive train control system into our budget. And some of the work that you're going to see and some of the budget proposals directly address the fact that we believe we have to lower the cost of implementation of positive train control. Agenda item 12 is included in your packet. It was from last year, where we came to you and requested funding approval to enter into a contract for positive train control. The annualized basis of that contract was about $4.6 million, but there are additional costs that bring PTC up to about $7 million per year based upon that business model. We're looking at a different business model where we bring some of those responsibilities in-house that NCTD will perform. In fact, we've already started that. We believe that we can bring positive train control costs down easily to $3.5 million and further lower those costs in future years. Hopefully to be normalized around a $2 million a year project cost. So it's going to be important with the investments that we have in this budget that we do advance that so that we can avoid those future costs. In terms of the overall budget, our budget this year is going to go up $10 million. Yoon is going to be able to walk you through the detail of it so that you can understand exactly why the costs are increasing. And these are investments that we are making into this system. And again, we have stress tested varying scenarios. And given the fact that we know and have secured the CARES Act funding, we believe that this budget is a very conservative budget. It's a budget that is consistent with the direction that has been provided by the board and supports the needs of the district moving forward. So with that, I will turn it over to Yoon unless there are any questions for me.
Thank you.
Hold on, Jack. I forgot I have last slide. Okay, so key takeaways. It is important that I mention this, is that we've had a consistent approach during my 11 years at the district and how the agency has been managed. And that has paid the significant dividends. Because if you go back to that first slide that I put up, is that we were in a negative cash position when I arrived. And we had a significant amount of backlog of state of good repair and lots of new services like the Sprinter that came online with no new source of revenue to cover literally the second year of operations. So that's been great for us. We're in a really good position as we sit today to achieve all of the goals that we've talked about over the last few years. We follow a 10-year approach. We develop a 5-year budget strategy that's pretty firm, but we do 10-year strategies so that we can do that look around the corner. So again, we try not to look at these things in 1-year tranches. We try to make sure that we're looking out and planning in a way that it allows us to support significant initiatives. And the example would be the procurement of the locomotives. We implemented a strategy so that we would not have to go out and borrow funding to be able to fund the projects. And I think we're substantially paid for those 5 locomotives without borrowing money because we had a financial strategy. So we need to be prepared to take advantage of some unique opportunities that are going to present itself to the district over the course of this year and years in the next couple of years. And if we don't plant the seeds and be significant advocates for our needs, we're going to get left behind. And so this is the time for us to make a push forward so that as the economy rebounds, as the country opens back up for business, that we're going to be really in a strong position to grow our ridership and implement the capital projects that we need and to contribute to the economic growth of the economy. Now I'm done.
Very good. Vice Chair Feller.
Thank you. The CARES Act was 94 million, 95 million.
95 million.
And I keep hearing different things, and that is money that does not have to be repaid unless you use it the wrong way.
Correct. Does not have to be repaid.
What are these?
100% money as opposed to typically the money we receive from the federal government requires a 20% state and local match. This is 100% money that we're receiving from the federal government.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question for Matt. This is Jewel.
All right, go ahead, Jill.
Thank you, Tony, or thank you, Chair. Matt, with regard to PTC, is there any movement among rail providers to seek future funding of PTC costs from the federal government?
Yes, ma'am. And in fact, I currently serve as the chair for the American Public Transportation Association's Commuter Rail Committee. And one of the activities that we are working on is forming a consortium with the Short Line Railroad Association, whereby we could create a framework for both commuter rail and short line railroads to leverage positive train control sources, positive train control operations with a smaller group of vendors. And our hope is that we would be able to track federal funding because it would streamline the FRA's oversight of positive train control. So to date, we have actually entered into a cooperative agreement of our intent, and we're about to start some key meetings, hopefully with the Federal Railroad Administration to discuss the framework. I have pitched this to the Federal Railroad Administration, and they have indicated strong support for that approach.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Any other questions from folks on the phone? Sharon? Yoon?
Good afternoon, board members. Thank you for being here today to listen to our presentation. It's really the district presentation on the proposed operating budget for 2021. So just before we start, I kind of wanted to give some framework on how we develop the budget. We have board policy number 17. It's the budget development policy. It kind of sets the framework of how we develop our annual operating and capital budget. Something very simple as the accounting. This is accrual basis is an accounting term, but just to clarify that when we develop the budget, we do it on accrual basis. What accrual basis means is that we are recognizing our revenues when we earn them, and we also recognizing our expenses when we incur them. So this is regardless when payments are made. So if we have any, for example, any expenses that are going to be paid in the subsequent month, that's irrelevant. It really depends on when those expenses are incurred. So that's very important to keep in mind. It's not a cash basis budget, it's an accrual basis budget. Also, we are required to adopt a balanced budget, meaning that revenues and expenses must balance, or revenues could potentially exceed expenses, but we cannot operate at a deficit. We also estimate our revenues very conservatively, meaning that we always take the approach of what will be the least likely scenario or the least amount of revenue that you could potentially get. I'll give you a quick example. So for example, when we are estimating investment income, we are using a threshold of $250,000 for a budget. What I can tell you in the last fiscal year, based on the balance that we had in our investment accounts, our investment income has been closer to $1 million. But we're always taking the approach that we want to be conservative because the cash balance can fluctuate depending on your outlays for capital needs based on the return that you have in investment accounts. So we just always want to be conservative and not be aggressive on how we estimate our revenues. The same thing, when we plan for expenses, we stress test to the sense that we try to estimate what's our maximum exposure for a specific expense. I'll show you later some of the assumptions that we use in the development of our budget. But an example of how we are very conservative with our expenses is how we budgeted our fuel expense for this coming fiscal year. So we know today that the price for oil for barrel has been significantly lower. We are around 30, just recovering right now about a barrel of oil. Today, we are paying for diesel for locomotives close to 80 cents a gallon. That's unprecedented. Last year, we were paying close to $2 a gallon for diesel. So, but when we develop our budget, we say, okay, right now the markets are down, but we have to kind of have into context the long-term history of how oil prices can vary significantly. And as the economy starts recovering, we can expect that the price of oil is going to go up. So we said we're going to be conservative. So when we budget for fuel, we did it based on a $50 and a $60 price per barrel of oil. So basically what we're trying to say here is that when we budget for expenses and when you look at our operating budget, it's pretty much the worst case scenario. How far our expenses are going to go. And if you were to compare on prior periods, you will notice that more than likely our actual expenses come down much lower than what we budgeted because again, we were very conservative on how we budgeted those expenses. Also along the board policy, we as a board policy, debt, either short-term or long-term, should be for valid business reasons and including temporary cash flow emergency, shortfall, and urgent unfunded capital improvements. We have not budgeted any short-term or long-term financing for emergency shortfall. We did budget some interest. We'll show you later on related to the commercial paper program that we will enter with SANDAC and we will present to the board in our next meeting. So we can be able to buy the additional 2 train sets for the SANDAC for the coastal expansion plan sometime for 2023, 2024. So with that said, during the budget process, there's a lot of things that are really unknown. And you have to build your budget within a framework of assumptions. For example, we have a lot of revenues that are driven based on the economy, driven by sales tax. We don't know by certainty what those sales taxes are going to be. So you have to build your budget within assumption of where you think that threshold of revenues are going to be coming to the district in the next fiscal year. So what I'll be presenting in the next few slides are what are the significant assumptions that are driving our fiscal year 2021 operating budget. So on the federal side, NCT receives quite a large amount of Federal Transit Administration funding. This funding is used for either capital projects or to support preventive maintenance expenses for the district. For this year, we have been allocated $34.5 million based on 3 formula type grants. Those are Section 5307, 5311, 5337, and 5339. We have not received any notices from the Federal Transit Administration that the original apportionments that were allocated early in the year have changed. So at this point in time, we are working with the assumption that we will still have the same apportionment that was allocated to the FDA earlier this year. As far as the next 2 funding sources, one of them, which is the TDA and the Transnet, both of them are generated from sales taxes. TDA is a 0.25% sales tax, and Transnet is a sales tax that's particular for the San Diego County. Those estimates were revised downward from January. Typically, the county auditor and also the state controller's office release the allocations for those funding. It typically happens in January at the beginning of the calendar year. So they're used in the development of the fiscal year that starts on July 1st. SANDAG revised those estimates down. So we are looking at 12% reduction in both our TDA. It's about 12 and 13% reduction in both our TDA and Transnet revenues for fiscal 2021. Those are the revised estimates that came in May compared to where they were back in January and February. What I do want to indicate is that any shortfall from sales taxes will be covered by the CARES Act money. So I'm kind of responding to the question that you were asking about the $95.4 million of CARES Act money. Those monies are available for us to use on a monthly basis as we are incurring expenses. They are not advanced. The federal government doesn't write us a check and give us $95 million. We have to incur those expenses before we are able to draw on those funds. So as we are incurring the expense for the year, and again, if the economy recovers, we should be able to draw less, but if the economy deteriorates, we're gonna just be drawing out more out of that funding. But it's almost like an open line of credit. So you have a line of credit of $95 million and you draw down on that balance as you need it. But it's not really a line of credit because we don't have to repay it.
may I ask, is that, on that last slide, was that 5 million for,
CARES Act
yeah, the CARES Act, but is that a shortfall for the year?
for the year.
Okay.
Then the other source of revenue, like I indicated earlier, is Transnet. This is the half sales tax, the half-cent sales tax from the county. Those estimates were also revised downward by SANDAG. We're looking at 13% decrease from the original estimates that were provided back in February earlier this year. We are estimating that the shortfall is going to be $1.9 million, and we will be covering as well that shortfall with CARES Act monies. One of the things that we do want to also indicate here is that Transnet's money allocate about 8.1% of total collections for public transit systems. We have not budgeted the additional revenues that NCTD will be entitled in the event that we begin our expanded service for the coaster in 2021. So those revenues are not budgeted here. However, those expenses are. So basically what it means is that if we get those additional Transnet revenues for that increased service, it just means that we're going to be needing less CARES Act money to cover, any of those operating needs. And then the next type of funding that the county, the North County Transit District received is also state transit assistance funding. This funding is derived from tax on diesel. We have so far not received any communication from the state that the revenue for STA will be revised downward. We have noticed that the price of diesel have gone significantly down in the last few months, but there is still not yet any formal communication from the state whether or not our allocation will be changed. Will be allocated for fiscal year 2021. It's total $10.4 million for STA funding. Obviously, in the event that those revenues come in lower, we will be drawing from the CARES Act funding if that was necessary. Also, as one significant assumption as well is that as far as fare revenue, our district has been like any other transit agency across the nation. We have been negatively impacted by COVID-19. So we are expecting that there will be a decrease in ridership compared to prior years. I think we're starting with a 50% decline in July, progressively getting better, and maybe leveling it out somewhere around 10% November through June of next year. But due to the negative impact of COVID-19, we are forecasting potentially a loss of fare revenue of $3 million. We intend to cover this deficit with CARES Act funding as well. Within our budget, we have also budgeted an additional $9.3 million from CARES Act funding to cover our preventive maintenance costs. CARES Act funding is pretty broad open as far as what type of operating expenses we can use. We can use them either for operations, we can use it for preventive maintenance. There's really no conditions or any limitations as far as the type of expense. So we have budgeted an additional $9.3 million to cover our additional maintenance cost. As far as other revenues, the district receives a wide range of revenues, such as revenues from leases and permits and advertising and from right-of-way shared use maintenance agreements. We have budgeted those revenues to either be flat or increase somewhere between 0 and 3% with projected inflation of 2%. The biggest source of revenue, which is the right-of-way shared use maintenance agreements, those are increased every year based on the railroad price index. So if that index goes up, we adjust our agreements accordingly. So somewhere between 0 and 3% for all these miscellaneous revenues. The graphic here illustrates what are our kind of summarizing what I just presented, what are going to be our major sources of funding for the next fiscal year. Local grants, which is TDA Transnet, continues to be our biggest source of revenue. That's the $52 million that you see. And then total funding for federal, for both our formula grants and for CARES Act, we are budgeting $39 million from that source. And this in here is just an illustration of the different, what we call the color money. So TDA is 37.9, followed by CARES Act for 20.7, and then FTA. If you recall, we got allocated by the CARES Act $95 million, combination of both 5307 and 5311 funding. Right now for fiscal year 2020, we have not drawn down any funding as of March. We still had some surplus as of March, so we have still not used any of the $95.4 million. We are projecting that we may need to use some of that funding in April. We've seen a significant impact on our fair revenues in April, so we may be drawing some of that funding. But what you can see is that we had $95 million, and we're only using $20.7 million for FY21. So that gives us quite a bit of capacity in case things don't go our way, like if sales taxes coming much lower than we expected. If we could potentially accelerate some of our capital needs for part of our FY22 to FY25 capital program, we could bring some of those earlier. So basically what I want to illustrate here is that we have sufficient funding from the CARES Act to cover any potential unforeseen circumstances at this point.
So to clarify, that 20.7 identified on the line with the Federal CARES Act, that represents the various amounts that in the previous slide, that's the total of each
Correct.
item where you said we're going to fund this much by CARES.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. And this is exactly what you were asking is how is CARES Act covering all those deficits? So preventive maintenance 9.3, shortfall from TDA is 5.1, shortfall from passenger first $3 million, and then from Transnet 1.9, and then we are using the entire allocation for our rural routes 5311 of 1.4. That brings us to 20.7.
Through the chair, I have a question. This is Jewel.
Go ahead, Jewel.
Thank you. You mentioned that diesel fuel, you use diesel fuel as an example of a significant budget line expense, which is subject to market conditions, and that is currently quite low in cost based on the norm. Does it make sense to purchase or stockpile fuel or futures is one question. And also, if so, is there funding available within the budget to do something like that? So I think that's a Yoon and Matt question.
Yeah. So, Jill, so each year we advance fuel strategies. In some years, we actually purchase and execute a fixed price contract for 2 years. We went out to bid for a fuel contract a few months ago. No bidders were willing to do a 2-year fixed price, which kind of tells you what that community thought was coming down the pipeline. And so we ended up executing a 2-year agreement where we're essentially getting the spot price for fuel. So for us, this is the most advantageous because at this time, no one is really wanting to lock into a fixed contract in either way. There are agencies that lock up agreements and hedge and purchase in the futures market. All of the best analysis, and there have been significant studies to say that if you do that, your best case scenario is if you do it 100 times, you end up at 0. But there are also significant risks if you end up on the wrong side and you have a margin call and you have to put money into the program. So the strategy that we've had in place over the last 5 years, I know we're significantly on the right side, that we have saved far more dollars than if we had entered into one of the more complex strategies. We get pitched for those strategies. Those strategies, really can't necessarily protect you from the market conditions. And so the answer to your question is we tried that. It didn't fit within the market framework. But overall, when we look at our fuel strategy, we are definitely on the right side of significant savings based upon the strategies that we've taken.
But budgetarily, I think you said your budget is based upon $60 a barrel.
$50
Yes.
and $60. Yeah.
And where are we at now?
We're at $30.
Yeah, 30. So we're good as long as we don't get above 60.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And thank you for that detailed explanation, Matt. In my 4th year on the board, I've seen you come with the fuel contracts, and I do understand that strategy. I was just looking at this as being kind of prime opportunity to perhaps buy fuel at a cost that's significantly lower, pretty much historically low at this point.
Great thought. Yes.
Thank you.
So now we're going to move into the what we call the significant assumptions for expenses. These are the biggest assumptions that are driving our operating budget. Purchase transportation is by far the largest line item that we have in our operating budget. Our purchase transportation contracts for both the bus and rail operations have clauses for adjustments that are done every year based on a consumer price index. So for this fiscal year 2021, our contract for both bus and rail will be adjusted by 2.3454%, and our contract for our facility will be adjusted at 3%. So obviously, when you have a CPI adjustment, your cost is going to go significantly higher, especially when we're talking about a $60 million budget line item. So about 2 to 3% in the increase of purchase transportation is attributed to annual escalation based on contract terms. We also increase the staffing levels for our rail contract to support increased coaster service schedule for April 2021, and also to support increased maintenance activities on the right-of-way. Matt mentioned earlier, part of the strategy is related to positive train control, staffing investments that we're doing today in order to minimize our costs in the future. The next large item in our budget is the fuel budget. As I explained earlier, we have built the budget assuming that price of oil will be at $50 from July through March, and it will be at $60 from April through June. The price of Brent crude oil was $30 on May 7, 2020. We also had to build in our budget the fuel consumption for the new Siemens locomotives. The new locomotives have a higher engine horsepower than the older locomotives, and they consume approximately 40% more fuel than older locomotives. So we had to incorporate that as well in our operating budget. And as far as the compressed natural gas pricing for our budget, for the Breeze fleet, they consume based on, they use CNG basically to fuel the vast majority of our Breeze fleet. We use a pricing from January. We believe that this is pretty conservative. If we take it, good things is that the price of CNG has not fluctuated much in the last 6-12 months. And using the January pricing is pretty conservative, because typically in the winter is when the prices are a little bit higher. So we have budgeted our CNG based on that pricing, which is 0.37766 cost per therm. The next one is our personnel cost. One of the things that we, when we budget, we assume full staffing. So meaning that every position that's open has been, there's no vacancies. So, and with that said, we budgeted based on total of FTEs of 145.5. There's an increase of 15 FTEs. Those are related for the bringing in-house our dispatchers from the contract from the rail from over there. So they're going to be brought in as NCTD employees. We also assume capital labor. Basically what it is that we have staff that's working on capital projects. And as long as they are working on capital projects and they meet the certain criteria, we can capitalize those costs. So those costs are not reflected in the operating budget. They're reflected on your capital program. So for fiscal year 2021, we budgeted about $400,000 less in capital labor. Therefore, it will increase our operating budget. We have not included the CalPERS unfunded accrual liability payment in our budget. And we have also not budgeted for any salary increases for fiscal year 2021.
And just on that note, just as a reminder to board members, you received a copy of a memo from me to all employees notifying them that there will be no salary increases for fiscal year 21.
The additional line item, positive trend control, we are still in the testing phase. We plan to probably finalize that project the end of next calendar year, December 2021. So as long as we're in the testing phase, none of those costs are going to be reflected in our operating budget. They will be funded through our capital project, which is number 512560. Interest expense is higher this year compared to last year. We continue to have our Sprinter debt payments. Those are going to be paid in September 2034. But we also have to budget interest costs associated for the procurement of 2 new train sets for the service expansion. SANDAC allocated $58.8 million through the program budget for the train sets, but those monies are going to be coming over the next course of the next 4 years through 2024. But in order to meet procurement timelines for payments, we are going to be drawing down from or entering into a commercial paper program with SANDAC so we can make those payments. And then
Vice Chair Feller has a question for you.
I have one quick question. The 15 dispatch, explain how that was, again, why that saved money adding people.
What I would do is, if you're okay with it, defer. Later in the slide, we have a breakout
Okay.
of those, and we will walk you through that in detail.
I mean, you did that once.
Yes, sir.
But I just thought everybody should do that.
Yeah, it's coming up, Jack.
And then under professional services, we have several type of expenses under this line item. They include facilities maintenance, electrical, plumbing, law enforcement, security contracts, legal audit services, fair collection cost, bridge inspection, software maintenance, and assessment and project study reports. So the graphic that you see in the bottom shows the total dollar value of professional services by division. And you will see that the vast majority of our professional services come from the development services division and from the administrative division. And the reason for the increase in the administrative division is because beginning fiscal year 2021, the Security Oversight Department, which is the one that oversees the law enforcement contracts, that's a total budget of about $3.8 million are being moved to administrative services. That's why you see that large increase for administration. Property insurance and liability insurance, we are expecting an increase of 40% this coming fiscal year compared to FY20 due to market conditions. You received as part of your packet a presentation that was done by our Office of General Counsel a few months ago explaining the reason for the increase of insurance in the marketplace. We also have we have $1 million for contingency. We are reserving these monies for emergencies, including increased costs to respond to COVID-19. The payment for debt principal is not including the operating budget. That's basically a pay down of a liability, and that will be paid from our net assets. And other recurring costs, we're projecting that those will increase between 2 and 3% based on the historical trends. And those other costs are utilities, telephone, water, training, travel costs, memberships, dues, leases, etc. So in here, you see an illustration of our the mix of our operating budget. You can see that our largest expense are our purchase transportation contracts. That makes up more than 50% of our total operating budget. And here is a quick summary that puts it all together. You'll see on the top section our total operating revenues and in the lower section our total operating expenses. You'll see that we have adopted a balanced operating budget. We do not have any need to include any carryovers from FY20 through FY21. We are projecting that we will have a carryover of at least $3 million in FY20, and that carryover will be used to build our net assets and our net position. So we will not be using any carryover for FY21. So in this slide, this slide illustrates what are the biggest drivers for our total expenses. So our total operating expenses went up about $10 million compared to the prior fiscal year budget. This shows what are the biggest drivers, the dollar value of them, and the percentage increase from the prior budget. So I will be explaining on these slides, what are driving this cost. So to start with, we have our bus operations and maintenance contract. If you see on this slide, you see a decline in the cost, but that decline is a net of several items that go into that line item. We know that our cost has to go up because we have an escalation clause. So our contract will go up by 2.345% just based on CPI adjustment. However, on the other end, we're able to offset those increases by improvements in productivity. So again, you see a negative. So it was really, if we had not had these adjustments for productivity, that line item would have been a lot higher.
Let me stop on that a little bit. I know we have provided a memorandum to the board. As you can see, if you go back one slide, that for this fiscal year 21, this budget goes down. And as Yoon identified, we had significant productivity improvements in this contract. We did a really good job, I believe, in structuring this contract, which allows us to capture productivity improvements. We've worked very closely with our contractor to achieve improved productivity over time. And so out of just the transparency of this, there are additional savings beyond the savings that are identified in this budget. Part of the savings, as we've specified in the memo from Damon to me, includes addressing a couple of issues that I think are critical for the district. One is that we have bus operators who start with $13 an hour as pay. We have a significant amount of turnover in those positions and suffer retention and focus and struggle at times to attract the quality of folks that we're looking for in those positions. One of the things that we've agreed with our contractor is to make an adjustment on the starting wages to be more competitive and to support us achieving greater productivity in the future. There's another aspect of it related to healthcare costs, particularly healthcare costs associated with family plans. We took a deep look at that, and I believe the number is about 40% of certain employees' total income could go to the cost of healthcare. And one of our approaches was to normalize the healthcare where the employer was paying about 80% and the employee was 20%. Keep in mind, we're talking about people who are making $20,000, $30,000, $40,000. And so when we come forward with this budget, even with that even with the productivity improvements and some of the investments going back to employees, we suspect that we are probably going to achieve close to another $400,000 to $500,000 in savings on top of the number there. But I did want to show that out of just clarity for the board members. Keep in mind, these are not our employees. These are contracted employees. But this really does support our mission at NCTD. And frankly, it's the right thing for us to do, making sure that we don't have people in a position that the vast majority of their paycheck is going to healthcare.
Can you speak to assurances that we have that the productivity savings are going to actually end up, since this is not these aren't our employees, how will we know that those dollars are going to end up as you described?
The way our contract is set up. So when we set up this contract, we actually have it in both directions in terms of the financial framework. So if the money does not go to the employees, it comes back to NCTD. So that's not a debate for us whatsoever.
Now the other line item, this is related to our rail operations and maintenance contract. You will see that it remains fairly flat at 180,000 increase year over year, about 0.7%. But again, this is a net result or certain items that go in this line item. So first of all, We are still subject to the 2.354% CPI adjustment. We did decrease our costs, so costs went up because of CPI and costs went down due to the transfer of the dispatching function from the rail operations to NCTD in-house. So that saved $1.3 million in total costs under this contract. We also increased about $1 million for those new positions to support increased coaster service and maintenance activities. Like I mentioned earlier, any costs associated for expansion, for increase of service that we are scheduling for April 2021, those sources of revenue have not been included here. We're still working with SANDAG to finalize what will be probably sometime around October. We'll meet and look at the total, cost for that service. So that's going to be additional revenues for the district. Personnel, our FTEs went from 134.25 to 145.5. Mentioned earlier, part of this is the increase of 15 FTEs from the in-house rail dispatchers. And we had some positions that were eliminated, current vacant positions. There are no merit or cost of living increases included in this budget. And but you will wonder, why did the budget go up by $2.9 million? So the three major drivers for the increase on personnel costs is $1.9 million associated with the additional dispatching function. It's 15 positions in total. Our costs are also going to go up by $400,000. That's related to lower capital work performed by staff. So like I mentioned earlier, if staff works less time on capital projects, they go to the operating budget. Same, could go either way. If for some reason they work more on capital projects, then it goes the other way. And then we also had some reclassification of certain positions to higher cost position that accounts for about $500,000 of the total cost. And the following table will show you which were those positions that were reclassified based on business needs. So the first column illustrates the name of the position. The second one indicates whether that position was a new position, meaning that it got added, or it's a position that got eliminated, meaning that it's deleted. And then the total number of positions that were either added or deleted. So if you see, if you see in the top, we had quite a bit of positions that are, lower pay grade range than the ones in the bottom. So Operations Control Center technicians, management analysts, senior transit planner, ranges salary up to about $90,000 and $60,000. But yet we add, on the other hand, other positions that will better meet our current business needs, senior manager, maintenance and way manager, and a chief of planning. So those are in a higher wage scale. So we're shifting those positions without changing headcounts. Obviously, it's going to increase your total cost.
Can we go back, Yoon? Because I want to make sure I address Jack's question. So as it relates to this move in terms of the rail dispatch, and I know we had a good discussion around this. One of the things, particularly, there are a number of factors that drove that decision to bring it from the contractor to NCTD. I will just share, we provided all of you all a copy of a audit that we had completed for our Operations Control Center. This audit, the key findings from this audit were really focused around the fact that we have multitudes of different people in the Operations Control Center, and really no one clearly in charge when events occur, and needing to establish a clear command and control within the Operations Control Center. And that's critically important, especially when there's a service disruption or emergency and event occurs. But the other piece of this is related to positive train control. So one of the cost drivers in the positive train control, $7 million that was there formerly, was that proposers were wanting NCTD to fund a help desk to support 24/7 positive train control incident reporting tier 1 response. So rather than hiring or paying a contractor to hire a specific group of people to do that, it's more efficient for us to bring it in, this function in-house, and to train those employees to do the tier 1 troubleshooting, because they are already the first line communicators with the rail engineer or conductor when an event occurs. It also helps us kind of, the third point is that the Operations Control Center is our information center. It gives us clear transparency into what the contractor is doing or not doing without having it filtered. So when you look at the transaction, 1.3 million came from the rail contract, from taking that cost out. The remaining, when you look at it, comes from these position reclassifications to allow us to fully cover all of the costs that are associated with this. So that's when if you go back one slide, you break it out. Yeah. So so that kind of gives you the full narrative. I would suspect on the capital project side, Sandeck projects are going down dramatically. A lot of the projects that they have advanced don't have funding for construction. So this likely reflects the fact that our staff won't be charging time to projects that are now shelved pending funding. So we wanted to make sure that we gave you guys clarity on exactly what was going on with this budget, because there was a lot of moving parts in it. So back to you.
And then this table, it's really small here on the screen, but it's also attached to our staff report. Lists all the major professional services, 80% of the total. You can kind of see that the top two are the ones related to a facilities maintenance contracts and our contract with the San Diego Sheriff's Department for law enforcement and security at our stations. And then, as I indicated earlier, we are also including our budget an estimated $2 million increase on our both our property and liability insurance premiums due to the marketplace. Debt-related increase in cost is related to the commercial paper program that we are planning to enter to in order to be able to fund the new coaster train sets that were programmed in the Sandeck program budget. But the money for those train sets will come over the course of 4 years, and we have to make those payments much earlier than that. And then finally, we have $1 million in contingency. These are funding that we're setting aside in case there are emergencies, and particularly increased costs related to responding to COVID-19. So with that said, what are next steps? On June 3rd, we will be releasing our full budget document at our website, and also making it available for distribution here at GAO and our transit centers. That will be for June 3rd. Along the budget document, we will also post our class and comp schedule, our right-of-way recovery fee schedule, our service implementation plan, and our DBE goals for the next 3 years. And on June 18, in the next board meeting that we'll have here, will be open for public hearing, and the board will be adopting the FY 2021 operating budget and the related documents. Any questions?
Excellent, thank you. Anthony, do we have any telephonic comments?
No, sir.
Board member questions? Board member Jenkins.
I have a couple questions. You mentioned about the increase in the insurance cost and the unforeseen circumstances related to COVID. Is that something that we might be able to use CARES money for down the road? We might be able to draw some money from there.
Yeah, and CARES Act pays part of the total funding that we're using for the district to pay for any shortfalls that we're getting from our sales taxes. So CARES Act funding does play into our budget in order to be able to meet all these potential expenses.
So we may get some assistance with some of that.
Yeah, but for the most part, they are certain, we are going to earmark for the most part those CARES Act money either for a purchase transportation contract or for PM activities. And we could use the other remaining funding to cover for these expenses. But if you look at our total budget, it shows you the total revenues and total expenses. So we're pretty balanced out. So every expense is covered in some way or manner for all our different sources of revenue.
Okay, and then I had one other question. When you mentioned a while back about the increased fuel consumption for the new Siemens locomotives, I thought those were supposed to be more efficient.
Yes. So we, as we get closer to delivery, we have been out talking to folks who've already received the Charger locomotive. And the information that we're receiving from people who own Charger and operate Charger locomotives, that their consumption rates have been higher. So
how is that more efficient?
well, the big deal about the new locomotives is the fact that they're Tier 4
Right.
is the emissions, is the
Okay,
is the
it's
emissions.
Okay.
That's what the high focus is the emissions.
Okay. Okay, got it. Thanks.
Well, hey, this is Supervisor Desmond here.
Go ahead.
Hey, I just want to say thank you very much to Matt and you and staff and for putting this together for, it's a great presentation. You really spelled everything out in detail, showing us, where the costs are going up, where they're going down, and where you expect salary, not necessarily bonuses or increases, but where the salary costs are how they're fluctuating and with different positions. And, just thanks for a very comprehensive explanation of a very dynamic and moving document. Thanks.
Is that it, Jim?
Yeah, you want some, what else you want?
Thank you very much. Anybody else on the phone that would like to speak? Okay, no other questions. And this is an informational item, so there's no vote required. Thank you very much, Yoon.
Thank you very
and
much.
Matt. And next, moving on to item number 18, we're going to receive an update on the impacts of COVID-19 on transit operations from Sean Lumpero, the Chief of Safety. First, we're going to disinfect the podium.
Thank you again, Mr. Chair and board members. We'll go through a quick update. I know there was a memo that was in the board agenda packet that went out to all of you. That is a week old. If you've been following current events, things are changing fairly rapidly. Actions by the Board of Supervisors as well as the state has changed. Some of the restrictions have been eased. In fact, there was a new public health order that is published today by the county public health officer. Thank you. So we're reviewing the current public health order to make sure. Mostly that one it seems to affect restaurants. There's a safe opening checklist for restaurants, and that was the primary focus of the most recent one. But I will go through some of the updates that have happened since the last board meeting. And again, even this presentation may be slightly dated just based on how fast things are changing. So we'll talk about some of the updated guidance from not only the federal, but the state and local officials. We'll talk about how that has impacted operations and some of the responses that NCTD has done to mitigate some of those impacts of COVID. We'll talk about how we communicate to not only our customers, but our internal employees, and that includes contractors. And then we'll talk about longer term, what are we doing for restoration of service planning and some of the additional committees and functions that we're doing to help restore service. Since the last board meeting until now, the governor did update mid-April some of the key outlying actions and indicators that would be used before modifying the current stay-at-home order. There was a modification requiring face coverings in public, which came out on April 24th that was effective on the 1st for the public and then for businesses on May 8th. The county also stated 5 criteria that will be used to determine how the current public health order can be modified, and we've since seen at least 2 modifications to that. The CDC also released interim guidance for mass transit administrators, and that's a good general reminder on things that they're looking for, primarily focused on cleaning, and again, focused personal hygiene, safe distancing, a lot of the same things that we're getting from not only the federal, but the state and local level as well. As far as operations for NCTD, it's still down nearly 70%. We are seeing slow growth in ridership. We're now fairly consistently above 10,000 passenger weekday trips during a weekday. Rough breakdown is somewhere between 6,500 and 7,000 on the Breeze, right around 3,000 for Sprinter, about 150 between Lift and Flex, and then Coaster is right around 300. So we'd like to still see that incremental growth. I think certainly as some of these restrictions are eased, we will see more people out and about. and we are tracking that. And again, we hope that continues. We're still doing rear door boarding for fixer-up bus service, and we're monitoring the passenger counts there. There is, as Mr. Tucker already alluded to during the budget presentation, there is no reduction in employment hours for direct or contract employees. We have procured face coverings for customers, so we've got our first batch this week. We're going to distribute those to the contractors, so we're going to have an alternative for riders that do not have face coverings. We're able to provide a single-use disposable mask for those folks, and we'll have those available on our revenue vehicles. In addition, we're advancing a procurement to have bus operators protection barriers installed not only in our current fleet, but the fleet that's going to be arriving over the next several months based on board action and future action. So all of that will be there to protect those coach operators from anybody that may be may have impacts from COVID. In addition, we're also working towards purchasing hand sanitizing equipment for all our revenue vehicles. If you ride the coaster, you know we already have those on the coaster. We're going to add some additional ones, and we're also going to put those on the Sprinter and bus fleet to have that option as well as masks for our customers moving forward. We're continuing to update the public and our employees through various methods, whether that's rider alerts, press releases, social media updates. As things change, we're providing those updates. I have another memo that's getting ready to go out to staff that will highlight some of the recent changes that have happened in the county public health order. And we are still in contact with our regulatory agencies. I personally still have weekly calls with the Federal Railroad Administration and the Federal Transit Administration. I had 2 today, looking for updates, how things are going. A lot of focus on, again, how to grow ridership. How do we get those people back? The general theme is we need to make sure that people feel safe coming on our vehicles, and how we do that, make sure we have good cleaning protocols, and then a good communication strategy to bring those folks back. So based on that, NCTD is doing restoration of service planning in 3 key areas. The 3 are listed there: Ridership and Recovery Growth Task Force, which I'll have a slide for each of these, so I'll go through in a little more detail. Financial Health and Budget Plan, and then Safety and Operations Recovery Plan. The Ridership and Recovery Task Force is led by the Executive Director Division, and it's an expansion of plans that we had already started with some of our consultants to seek guidance on how we can grow and rebound ridership. It's going to focus again on data collection from riders to make sure that we understand what their current needs are and what future needs could be to help, again, grow our ridership, which is what we'd like to do. It is a cross-functional team. It does include members from the Board of Directors, so we appreciate the support and look forward to what comes out of that task force. Financial Health and Budget Plan. I think Yoon spent the last 30 minutes essentially detailing that, not only the short term, but the long term. And again, we have the effects of COVID-19 in our assumptions, not only for expenses, but what comes in as far as our assets. And she covered that, and that will continue to mature as we monitor the effects coming out in the next several months. As far as my piece, I'm leading the Safety and Operations Recovery Plan. We want to make sure that as we continue to grow ridership, we do it in a safe manner. We're focusing on 5 key areas as far as this group: communication and marketing. As I alluded to, we want to make sure people know we're out there. We have a safe operation. We clean our vehicles very well, and it's safe for them to ride our vehicles. Personnel management, we want to make sure that we keep employees, not only contracted, but our agency folks, aware of changes. So we want to make sure we have that key communication line open as well. Operational assessment and monitoring, that includes checking the status of revenue vehicles, parts availability, cleaning supplies, et cetera, to make sure we have everything we need to continue. Service and multimodal planning, as service may change. If we do increase service, we have to make sure that we do it correctly and look at how it affects all modes, not just one mode independently. And then finally, this plan is fluid. We want to make sure that it's continually evaluated. And as things change, as we can see this week, certainly various updates from the various regulatory agencies and other leadership organizations such as the Board of Supervisors want to make sure that our plan is current and it does seek compliance as we move forward with COVID-19. So in conjunction with the memo and then the presentation, that's all I really have, pending any questions from board members.
I have a question. We're finding it, the compliance with the facial coverings to be quite lax in beach use areas, as well as, our coast highway, et cetera. What sort of compliance are you seeing on the various modes of public transit?
That's a great question. So we'll tell you as far as the bus, so the coach operator has the ability to enter a code in RTMS system that's on the bus that says whether a person doesn't have a mask. So we're actually, at the end of the day, we get all the data from all the routes. And what we're observing right now is less than 0.5% of folks that are boarding the bus system without a mask.
So high.
High level of compliance. We're seeing about the same, and we get reports on the rail side from either the train attendants or the conductors that are in those vehicles, and they're also doing physical counts of folks that are either compliant or not, and we get a total number. I would say coaster is probably similar to the bus, and I think there's a little less compliance on the Sprinter overall, but still we're generally seeing above 75% on that mode. Again, depending on time of day, which train it is, it varies probably more than the other modes. But for the bus, we have hard data, and we have it for the rail modes as well. There's just, Sprinter has the most variance, I would say, as far as compliance for that. And we do have procedures. If people don't, we ask them that say, hey, you have to have a mask to ride. And then depending on how they react, we have a couple different options after that.
And on the Breeze buses, are we still boarding from the rear?
We are boarding from the rear, and we're also going to have masks available. So as we roll that out, if a customer boards without a mask, we can certainly guide them to say there's a mask right here for you to use. If for whatever reason you don't have one, you forgot it, we'll be able to direct them to that.
Are we looking for something in a public health order that would change it back to boarding from the front of the bus, or do we anticipate just sticking with the current program for an extended
We
period
certainly
of time?
want to maintain compliance with the public health order. From what we understand, the social distancing is going to be in effect for quite a while. So I think the rear door boarding helps support that because you don't have the customers going right by the coach operator. We're countering that with the barriers, so the procurement for those barriers for those coach operators, which will provide another layer of protection for our coach operators. So certainly we're going to be compliant with whatever it says, but I think the rear door boarding will be a follow based on whatever is recommended either by national, state, or local officials. So
Okay.
I don't know if that answers your question or
Well,
not.
and I wanted to add a little bit to that, though, Tony. I'm on a number of national calls, a number of committees that are working to develop a consensus and plans for the industry. And one of the comments I made, because I'm on the recovery portion of the task force, is that I don't think transit agencies are in a position to say that we are going to be operating like this 2 years, 3 years. CARES Act is not going to be rolling over year after year to transit agencies. And if we start taking this approach that transit ridership is going to be at the levels that it is today, then there's going to be a whole heck of a lot of less transit, in the next 18 to 24, 36 months. And so one of the things that I want to work closely with the board, particularly through our working group, to start talking about the phase steps that we should be more proactive and maybe more vocal about what should happen. One of the things that I would say is, for sure, you shouldn't be making a distinction between public transit and riding an airplane. If you can get on board an airplane and sit safely, closely, then you should be able to get on a public transit bus with the same expectation. So there's a series of things that we want to do as kind of conditions precedent to create a safer and cleaner environment in the transit system. But for sure, we have to be trending towards approach that we're going to be returning to normal operations within a reasonable range of time, which I won't specify at this point, but we can't do this for 2 years. We can't do this for 18 months.
Any other board member comments, questions? Jenkins.
Tony, through the chair, this is Jewel.
Yes, Jewel.
Thank you for asking the questions with regard to compliance. And the speaker cut out, so I couldn't tell the percentage of folks that are compliant. Could that be repeated?
Yes, ma'am. So as far as the Breeze buses, again, the coach operators are tracking that as customers board. What we're seeing on the fixed route buses is less than 0.5%, so 0.5 of folks are non-compliant or i.e. do not have a mask. We're seeing similar numbers on the coaster of those levels. Sprinter does vary, but in general, we're seeing about 75% compliance, which would mean 25% are non-compliant, again, depending on time of day, et cetera.
And have you had any folks that refused to wear masks?
We have, in general, they have other, in general, they have other issues as well. And again, we have the support from our law enforcement contracts that if necessary, we can have that additional service. We also have road supervisors for the bus that could come out if if a customer does challenge the order. But we do clearly state that it's required on all of our vehicles. We do have signage that says based on the current county public health order, they have to wear it. And again, ideally, we want to be de-escalatory, but if should the need rise, we do have the ability to have law enforcement come and support if required.
And let me just add a little bit to that though, because there is a reality. And the reality is just like fare collection. You're not going to be in a position in this industry to collect 100% of the fares. And I'll give you the example in our fare policy. Literally every agency I've worked at, I wanted to be truthful to the bus operators to avoid conflict. And so the policy we have as it relates to fares is that you ask no more than twice. Because if you continue having a conflict with the customer, it's likely to escalate far beyond that. And there's no circumstance where there's enough law enforcement in this county or any city that every time a bus operator has an incident that the law enforcement is going to show up. So it's not going to be any different with masks. We want everybody to 100% comply, but the truth of the matter is there is no mechanism in place for us to 100% enforce that. And so I want to make sure that we're speaking clearly and candidly on the fact that there's no method to be able to do that. One of the things we always try to give our employees is the ability to exercise sound and responsible judgment in these events. You have to do risk versus benefit in these kinds of discussions. So that's just the truth of the matter of how this gets handled day to day.
Thank you. Board Member Jenkins.
I was just wondering if you're having any trouble getting these supplies, or are they loosened up by now?
For the most part, everything we've ordered eventually comes. There may be some longer lead times of what we're seeing, but as far as we've been able to get masks, the cleaning supplies, hand sanitizer, we do have an additional order coming in. So in general, it may be a longer lead time, but eventually they do show up. So, and sometimes it may not be the same vendor at the same time. So I can't, if I order it from company A, if I go back, they may not have it. We may have to go to company B. But in general, it is a little longer lead time, but the materials are coming that we do need. On the coaster, they are.
Through the chair, this is Jewel. I hadn't quite finished my questions, but you couldn't help. I wanted to thanks, Matt. I agree with that the perceived safety of writing is something that we need to get out there from a marketing perspective. People need to understand how safe it is to ride. So that's where I was going with my mask questions. I think that those percentages of compliance are a really good thing to tout, not maybe the numbers so much as the fact that, let's thank our riders for being compliant and for keeping others riders safe as well as themselves. I just think it's an important tool. Thanks.
Good comment. Thank you. Any other questions from folks on the phone line? Okay. Thank you, Sean. Appreciate the report.
Thank you.
We have no telephonic comments. Anthony?
No, sir.
All right. There's no vote required. It's an informational item, and we are now moving on to closed session item 19. There is one, and as a reminder to those participating remotely, you're going to have to connect to the second Zoom invitation to participate in the closed session item. And then after the closed session, you'll need to reconnect to the one you're on right now. So with that,
Before before you go into closed session, this is Dave Drucker from Del Mar, and because this is based upon a letter that we did send in, I will be recusing myself from this, and I will, if Anthony, you could, send me an email or text me when you come back in, I can join back in. So I will be again recusing myself from this this closed session.
Yes,
Thanks.
sir. I will be putting the regular board meeting on pause during closed session. Once we reconnect, everybody will be connected and we can make that announcement, sir.
Okay, thank you.
I'm
Thanks, Dave.
Supervisor Desmond here. Hey, I'm not clear. I have a second Zoom. I don't have a second Zoom address or whatever. Can you resend that to me or?
Yes, sir. I will re-forward you the email, sir.
Okay. Can you send it to my personal email?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, we'll do that. We'll do that, Jim.
Otherwise it goes through the office and I don't get it right away, but thank you.
Okay, and with that, General Counsel Lori Winfrey will take us into closed session.
Yes, sir. Thank you. So we have one item for closed session today pursuant to Government Code Section 54956.9, subsection D4, one potential case, initiation of litigation based on existing facts and circumstances. right, so the board is returning from closed session and there's no reportable action.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Tucker, do you have anything to report under the executive director's report?
I think everyone has a copy of my executive director's report. So much of the information I would report is contained there. I would tell you that next month we do plan to come to the board to brief you a little bit on a strategy related to Del Mar Bluffs and other projects. We've been making good progress. Next month, if things continue on track, we will also be coming forward with a procurement request to support the purchase of a significant tranche of buses that would essentially allow us to reach a state of good repair. And the future buses that we would be purchasing would be electric or hydrogen buses. So lots of good progress being made throughout the district during this difficult time in terms of advancing projects and getting money out into the economy.
Excellent.
Excuse
Okay,
me,
and
I have a question.
all right.
I have a question for the Ridership Recovery and Growth Task Force. When will we be hearing about meetings, future meetings?
I will ask Katie to put that out.
Okay.
And so just a little bit on that note, one of the things that we're trying to do with the Ridership Recovery Committee is we're really going out to the public via social media and other ways to start collecting information real time from the public as this event unfolds. And so what we really do want to do is leverage with the board member input, as well as other agencies, because Orange County Transportation Authority has informed me that they will participate. MTS has indicated that they're going to participate in our working group. Sandag has indicated that they were participating well. So we're looking to bring real-time data as we work through about a strategy to grow ridership in the future. Because again, the point of view that I'm wanting to make sure we all think about is the future. I know there's a ton of prognostications going on about what's going to happen in the future. I really do believe as we are able to move through this, things will be more normal than different.
Yeah, well, I appreciate being on the working group, but I know there are people much smarter than me that are applying their noggins to how to recover from this. I've seen a number of people that have been in the industry a really long time that are focused on this. So I'm hopeful. Board member Desmond has been working to get the county back to life, so to speak. Hopefully we have everything in place to make sure that it's done safely and we can get people back to taking advantage of public transportation. So do any other board members have comments, reports, or correspondence?
I'll just real quickly, Jim, Desmond, we did go ahead and as reported earlier, qualified to open up restaurants for dining in and for retail stores to be open. And I know this isn't NCTD related, but potentially we get more people riding transit, if we get the consumer confidence back up. What I'd really like you to do is impress on your businesses that are open that we all still need to follow the social distancing protocols, just like we do on public transit. And we need to, a lot of people don't like them, but those rules and restrictions, but we really need to conform by them so we don't slide backwards, so we don't have videos going to the governor's office of people crowding in different areas. I know it's going to be difficult at the beach this weekend because the beach is about the only thing you can go to here in San Diego County. But I think, if you can impress that upon people to follow all those social guidances and distancing and mask rules, it's really going to help us move further along so we can get back to, a stronger economy and people using transit.
Yes, thank you. And that's the hook right there. It's the people using transit, because I can tell you we have, it's been quite a challenge because the beaches have been used extensively, but parking has been closed. So there is no better way to get to the beach in Encinitas than by taking the coaster. And so I'm encouraging people. The same will be true when restaurants start opening. We also have some challenges with the social distancing, the physical distancing requirements, and we discussed at our council meeting last night the possibility of repurposing some parking spaces for restaurant tables. So again, we're going to be short on parking spaces, which will make the need for transit that much greater. So thank you for all you're doing, and everybody, riders, drivers, our staff, you are critical workers, and I appreciate everything that's happening there. So any other board member reports, comments, or correspondence?
Yes, I'm sure a bunch of people read about the announcement that the fairgrounds is looking at building some tiny houses at the horse park, and I hope that Matt, you will get involved a little bit in that to make sure that we have the correct transit options for people, maybe up to 1,000 people or so.
Okay, thanks. That's Dave. And
Yep.
Any other comments?
I still want my HOV lanes on the 78.
Of
Doesn't
course you do. Of course, there's some things that just won't go away. So in the meantime,
This is Jewel. Can you hear me?
yes, ma'am.
Okay. I just want to let you know that I attended the LoSAN meeting on Monday. And during that meeting, they also spoke about the reduction, having reduction in service from 13 to 6 round trips per day. However, like was reported earlier, ridership is now trending up and improving daily. And in the case of LoSAN, last week they had a 32.8% increase over the prior week. So things are moving in the right direction. They also wanted to, or made mention of the fact that NCTD's contributions have been wonderful in working together, especially at looking for solutions. So to ridership issues. So I just want to share that.
Okay, thank you. Anthony, do we have any other remaining public comments?
No, sir.
All right, our next board meeting is June 18th, 2020 at 2 p.m. And we're going to adjourn this meeting today on a sad note. Paul Jablonski, the CEO of the Metropolitan Transit System in San Diego, passed away a couple of weeks ago. And so we're going to adjourn in his honor. I would like to say that, give a little background, personal background. Paul Jablonski began his career in the transit industry at an early age by driving a bus for the University of Massachusetts campus in Amherst. From there, he went on to work at the Capital District Transportation Authority in Albany, New York, American Transportation Enterprises, a 4.5-year stint overseas in Saudi Arabia. Then he was in the Southwest Ohio Regional Transit Authority in Cincinnati as the general manager. In 2003, after 11 years in Cincinnati, Paul took the job in San Diego as CEO of MTS. During his tenure as CEO, MTS has received numerous awards and is recognized nationally for its efficiency. With Paul's persistence and persuasion, he was able to move forward the 11-mile, $2.1 billion Mid-Coast trolley extension. He also played an integral part in the trolley renewal project with complete rebuilds of the orange and blue lines from 2011 to 2015. Paul fought to get this included in the Transnet Early Action Program, as it allowed for low-floor trolleys, cars to operate, improving on-time performance and helping passengers with mobility challenges. On a personal note, I had the opportunity to meet Mr. Jablonski when I took a trip on behalf of NCTD to the American Public Transportation Association Legislative Conference in 2016. And that trip was part of an effort to get $1 billion out of the federal government for the Mid-Coast extension. And so I had the opportunity to sit next to him at dinner, and we had a very robust conversation, talked a lot of politics, and what I found is that we were about polar opposites politically, but we had a great conversation. And the next day we got up and went into the legislators' offices, and he did his job alongside Ron Roberts and came back from Washington, D.C. with $1 billion. And so with that, we say goodbye to Paul, and this meeting is adjourned.
Thanks.